For more than 50 years, Steven Spielberg has shaped the way the world watches movies. He has worked with hundreds of performers, from unknown newcomers to the biggest stars on the planet, and he has built a body of work so vast that it touches nearly every genre imaginable. Yet across all those decades and all those collaborations, a small handful of actors keep resurfacing in his career, again and again, as though something about the chemistry between director and performer simply refused to fade. These are not necessarily the actors who won him the most awards or generated the most headlines. They are the ones who, by all accounts, left the deepest mark on him personally and creatively. Today we're counting down 6 performers who hold a special place in Spielberg's story. The collaborators who didn't just appear in his films, but who helped define them. There may be no actor more closely associated with the adventurous, thriller-minute spirit of Spielberg's filmmaking than Harrison Ford. Long before he became a household name, Ford was a journeyman actor doing carpentry work on the side to pay the bills. Then came a chance meeting that would change everything. George Lucas cast him in Star Wars, and shortly after, Spielberg and Lucas together decided he was exactly the kind of leading man their pulpy adventure serial homage needed. That decision produced Indiana Jones, and with it, one of the most enduring partnerships in Hollywood history. What makes the Ford-Spielberg dynamic so distinctive isn't just the box office success of the Indiana Jones franchise, although 4 films across 4 decades is no small achievement. It's the way Ford approached the physical demands of the role. Reports from the sets of Raiders of the Lost Ark and its sequels describe an actor who insisted on doing as much of his own stunt work as safety allowed, who pushed through injuries rather than call for a double, and who treated the character's scrapes, bruises, and exhaustion as essential to the storytelling rather than inconveniences to be minimized. Whip cracking, boulder dodging, and truck chasing aside, Ford brought a lived-in physicality to Indiana Jones that grounded the fantasy in something believable. Spielberg has spoken warmly over the years about Ford's professionalism and his instinct for comic timing, noting that Ford has a gift for finding the human, self-deprecating side of a hero, the exhausted sigh after a narrow escape, the reluctant grin when a plan actually works. That combination of vulnerability and swagger became the template for a new kind of action hero, one who could be funny, flawed, and fallible while still saving the day. It's a mold that countless films have tried to copy since, and few have matched. For Spielberg, Ford represents dependability in its purest form, an actor who shows up prepared, delivers what the story needs, and rarely if ever demands the spotlight off camera. That kind of steadiness, especially on notoriously difficult productions, is worth more to a director than almost anything else. If Harrison Ford represents reliability and physical commitment, Daniel Day-Lewis represents something almost the opposite, an actor so immersive and exacting that working with him becomes less like directing and more like documenting. When Spielberg set out to make Lincoln, a passion project he had been developing in various forms for over a decade, he knew the entire film would live or die on the strength of its lead performance. Day-Lewis, already famous for his rigorous, immersive approach to character work, was Spielberg's first and only real choice. By most accounts of the production, Day-Lewis's preparation extended far beyond memorizing lines. He studied Lincoln's documented speech patterns, his handwriting, his gait, reportedly working to internalize the president's cadence and mannerisms so thoroughly that cast and crew began referring to him in character even off camera. Spielberg has described the experience of directing him as something closer to observation than instruction. There was little need to coach an actor who arrived already having done the excavation work himself. The set reportedly took on an unusually formal, hushed atmosphere during the shoot, with many treating the space with the kind of reverence usually reserved for a historical reenactment rather than a film set. The result was a performance that felt less like an impersonation and more like a genuine act of resurrection. Day-Lewis's take on Lincoln avoided grand, theatrical gestures in favor of something quieter. A slow, deliberate way of speaking, a stooped posture that suggested the physical toll of leading a divided nation, small hesitations that conveyed the weight of impossible decisions. It earned him a Best Actor Academy Award and is widely regarded as one of the finest screen performances of the 21st century. For Spielberg, a director famous for meticulously shaping every emotional beat of a scene, Working with Day-Lewis required an unusual kind of trust, the trust to step back and let a performance simply exist without excessive interference. That experience, by Spielberg's own account, was both humbling and unforgettable, and it's part of why Lincoln remains one of the films he speaks about with the most evident pride. No actor has appeared in more Spielberg films across a longer span of time than Tom Hanks, and the partnership between the two men has become one of the defining collaborations in modern American cinema. Beginning with Saving Private Ryan in 1998, Hanks and Spielberg have returned to one another again and again over the following decades, through Catch Me If You Can, The Terminal, Bridge of Spies, and The Post, among others. Few director-actor pairings in film history can claim that kind of consistency. Part of what makes the collaboration work so well is the trust that has built up between them over the years. On Saving Private Ryan, a film built around the visceral chaos and moral weight of combat, Spielberg reportedly gave Hanks a great deal of latitude, trusting him to find the emotional truth of Captain Miller without needing constant guidance. Hanks has a rare ability to project quiet authority and moral seriousness without ever seeming to strain for it, which made him the perfect anchor for a film that needed a steady emotional center amid overwhelming violence and disorder. That same quality served both men well in Bridge of Spies, where Hanks played an insurance lawyer thrust into the middle of a Cold War prisoner exchange, and again in The Post, where he portrayed legendary Washington Post editor Ben Bradlee. In both cases, Hanks brought a grounded and showy gravitas that let the historical stakes of the story breathe without ever tipping into melodrama. Spielberg has often praised Hanks's discipline and his generosity as a scene partner, noting that Hanks tends to elevate everyone around him rather than dominate a frame. It's a rare kind of screen presence, commanding without being overpowering, and it's easy to see why Spielberg keeps returning to him whenever a project calls for a performer who can carry both the emotional and moral center of a story at once. When Spielberg cast a 27-year-old Leonardo DiCaprio in Catch Me If You Can in 2002, DiCaprio was still primarily known to the public as the heartthrob from Titanic. Spielberg, however, reportedly saw something else in him. A young actor capable of extraordinary control and precision, someone who understood how to modulate charm and desperation within the same scene. The role of Frank Bagnell Jr., a real-life con artist who impersonated pilots, doctors, and lawyers while still in his teens, required an actor who could be simultaneously charismatic and quietly unraveling underneath the surface. DiCaprio's performance threaded that needle carefully, letting audiences see the loneliness and instability hiding behind Bagnell's polished facade. Spielberg has spoken about being impressed by DiCaprio's preparation and his instinct for timing, noting that even as one of the youngest people on set, DiCaprio approached the role with the seriousness and attentiveness of a much more seasoned performer. Colleagues from the production have described him as someone who asked detailed questions about character motivation and continuity that most actors at his stage of a career wouldn't think to raise. Catch Me If You Can marked a turning point in how DiCaprio was perceived by the industry, helping to establish him as a serious dramatic actor rather than simply a teen idol, and it laid the groundwork for the string of acclaimed performances that would follow throughout his career. Though the two have not reunited on screen since, Spielberg has continued to speak highly of DiCaprio's subsequent work, at times floating the idea of future projects together, whether historical dramas or something more experimental. Nothing has yet materialized, but the mutual respect between them remains evident whenever either is asked about the other, and many industry observers consider a second collaboration between the two simply a matter of timing. It's almost hard to believe that two towering figures of American cinema went nearly 4 decades working in the same industry without ever collaborating, but that was the case with Spielberg and Meryl Streep until 2017's The Post. When the film finally came together, both figures, a director regarded as one of the most successful filmmakers in history and an actress widely considered among the greatest of her generation, were meeting for the first time in a professional capacity, and the anticipation surrounding their pairing was immense. Streep played Katharine Graham, the real-life publisher of the Washington Post who made the fateful decision to publish the Pentagon Papers despite enormous legal and financial risk to her company. It's a role that required Streep to portray a woman finding her authority and her voice in a male-dominated boardroom. and by most accounts, she brought in effortlessly to the part that belied just how difficult that internal transformation is to convey on screen. Spielberg has admitted to feeling a degree of nervousness directing her, a striking admission from a filmmaker whose confidence behind the camera is legendary. That nervousness, he has suggested, came less from doubting her abilities and more from the weight of finally working with an actress he had admired from a distance for the better part of his career. What reportedly struck Spielberg most was how little coaching Streep required. She arrived with such a complete understanding of Graham's inner conflict, the fear, the self-doubt, the eventual resolve, that Spielberg's job became less about shaping her performance and more about building the visual and narrative framework around it. The result earned Streep her 21st Academy Award nomination, an almost unfathomable milestone, and cemented the post as both a critical success and a testament to what can happen when two masters of their craft finally meet. Of all the names on this list, perhaps none produced a more emotionally complicated collaboration than Robin Williams. Their film together, 1991's Hook, is often remembered as one of the more troubled productions of Spielberg's career, an ambitious, sprawling reimagining of the Peter Pan story that ran over budget, faced constant rewrites, and left Spielberg himself later acknowledging that the finished film didn't fully live up to his original vision. And yet, despite those struggles, Spielberg has spoken about the Hook shoot with unmistakable fondness, almost entirely because of Williams. By numerous accounts from that production, Williams would call Spielberg in the evenings after long, grueling days of filming, not to talk shop or troubleshoot the day's problems, but simply to make him laugh, often riffing improvisationally for several minutes straight with no agenda beyond lifting the director's spirits. On a production defined by exhaustion and mounting pressure, that nightly ritual reportedly became something Spielberg genuinely looked forward to, a small oasis of joy in the middle of chaos. On screen, Williams brought a similarly rare blend of qualities to his portrayal of an adult Peter Pan who has forgotten his own magic. He infused the role with both slapstick energy and a genuine undercurrent of melancholy, capturing the specific sadness of a person who has let go of wonder without realizing it. Spielberg has often noted that while Hook may not be remembered as his most polished film, the experience of working with Williams left an impression that outlasted any of the production's shortcomings. Their bond extended well beyond the film itself. When Williams passed away in 2014, Spielberg was reportedly deeply affected, later revealing that he had paused work on another project in the immediate aftermath to process the loss of his friend. The two never worked together again after Hook. But for Spielberg, one collaboration with Williams was enough to leave a permanent mark, a reminder, in his own words, of why he fell in love with storytelling and spontaneity in the first place. Looking across these 6 names, a clear pattern begins to emerge. Spielberg's favorite actors aren't necessarily defined by fame, box office power, or even the number of awards they collected together. What unites Harrison Ford, Daniel Day-Lewis, Tom Hanks, Leonardo DiCaprio, Meryl Streep, and Robin Williams is something less quantifiable, a rare combination of trust, discipline, and emotional generosity that allowed Spielberg to do his best work. Each of them, in their own distinct way, gave him something he couldn't manufacture on his own: Ford's physical commitment, Day-Lewis's total emotion, Hanks's steady moral center, DiCaprio's precision, Streep's effortless authority, and Williams' spontaneous joy. It's worth remembering that Spielberg has directed dozens of other remarkable actors across his career, and different lists compiled from different interviews might well include other names. But these 6 collaborations, in particular, keep surfacing in his own reflections on his career, suggesting they represent something genuinely formative to him, not just performances he admired from a distance, but partnerships that shaped how he thinks about storytelling itself. What do you think of this list? Are there other actors you'd consider essential to Spielberg's legacy? Let us know in the comments below. And if you enjoyed this look back at some of cinema's most memorable collaborations, consider subscribing for more deep dives into the stories behind the movies we love.